As the sun sets at the end of a New York workday, the mind transitions from daily tasks to the cloudier, more philosophical regions of social issues, culture, and politics. In a democracy, every perspective on the world is important, and people in art and culture have surprising bodies of knowledge that can shed fresh light on today's reality. The following conversation with Rainer Leist took place in Midtown Manhattan on August 25th, 2021.
Rainer Leist is a German-born photographer living in New York. His long-term methodical series examine the relationship between individual lives and the environments and societies they inhabit. Window, a series begun in 1995, comprises a daily photograph taken from his apartment window of the changing Lower Manhattan skyline. Rainer, do you want to describe how you came to New York City? You've been here almost 30 years, is that right?
Yeah, I was living in South Africa. I was in the years of transition from apartheid to democracy in that country, and I thought I would stay there, but then the tempting offer was to get a scholarship to come to New York, and what young artist can turn that down? So I was kind of still holding on to that transition and not wanting to leave. And on the other hand, hoping for that New York experience. Always, read that cliche of saying, New York holds a promise, and I can't say that New York has not made good on that. It's made incredibly well.
Even people like me from other parts of this country, you come here and you think, maybe you'll spend some time here, but at a certain point you realize that you just live here. You realize that you're sort of permanent unless something knocks that off track. But was there a moment when you felt that that was the condition of your life, that you just now live in New York, you're a New Yorker?
I just work very slowly. I can't work fast. I can't do projects in a short period. So I knew if I was going to come, I would have to stay for an extended period, or there wouldn't be a point.
You started the Window series almost immediately once moving here.
Yes, I arrived in August '94, and I started it in early '95.
Well, your apartment is almost entirely view, so I think from the point of view of a photographer, it would be obvious to start taking pictures out the window.
Well, I had a friend, Joe Sternfeld, the photographer, came to visit, and he was making fun of me, and he said, oh, you're living on top of an elevator shaft, right? So, and I think that's true. He was right about that, but it was chance, right? I had this neighbor and who was saying, oh, it's becoming available, you should try it, and I did. I got lucky.
I mean, it's one of those kind of magical spaces in New York that you usually only see now in like Tim Burton movies. It's almost like the children's movies I used to love where people lived in windmills and things like that. Is this a part of your personality that you do things methodically, taking a picture every day? How did that become a routine?
I've come to understand that it is something that defines all of us, not just me. It's like the things that we repeat every day define us, and they may be not something we're aware of, like brushing our teeth or some habit we're not even conscious of. But that may define us more than that one singular thing we do once a year or something, and I think a lot about that. Yeah.
I think people place a lot of expectations on events, especially this last year with COVID, just understanding the rhythm of days and the texture of days, with very little happening in a way, especially a year ago when we were in the sort of serious lockdown. The smallest things become eventful. That's sort of the philosophy that you've...
I think both is true, I mean, if you have a traumatic event, it does define your life as much as something maybe that you do 10,000 times without it being an event. So I think the opposites are true. The paradox is important to me in that sense. I just had such a memory when I looked at the Empire State Building. I was remembering Leo Glickselik, a Jewish immigrant, refugee really, who came to New York in the 30s, and he exclaimed, oh, the taxis are yellow. We always thought they were gray because that's what they looked like in the movies.
Yeah, true. No, all of the classic photographs of New York City are in black and white. I mean, is that partly why you chose to use that format for your series? It automatically relates it to like Stieglitz and Bernie Sabat.
Right, there are some, but it was also feasibility. I mean, Could I have sustained it in color? I don't know, but I also have that kinship to black and white in terms of its history. There are two cameras. One is from the late 1900s, so about 1890, and the other one is from the 1920s, and that's somehow also I wanted to reference that time gap, that leap, and it made sense to do that in black and white.
I mean, in some ways, the equipment is an automatic reference to the time period. And
Exactly.
Looking at this landscape now, I mean, there are many new buildings, but you're also seeing buildings that were built in the 20s and the 30s and before that. I learned something interesting today, something that we have in common that I didn't know, and that is we were both in Cambridge, Massachusetts, the day of September 11th.
Ah,
Yeah, and I had just moved to Massachusetts from here, and I remember at the time feeling in some ways ashamed that I wasn't here during the actual bombing, and I'm just wondering if you could describe your feelings being away from
it
here.
was so extraordinarily strange. I remember, in a way that I remember Leo's comment on the Ray taxis, I was in an elevator in Cambridge, and someone pushed in a small black and white television, and all the footage that you have in your head when you think of 9/11 was playing on that monitor, and was the first time the event, visually reached me in that confine of that elevator, in that medium. So it was very, very, very strange, because it's also that's something that I grew up with, was a black and white television. So it was sort of, I don't know, there was sort of this repercussion back to childhood in a very odd way.
And then you came to New York, though, the next day, right?
It was the night of the 12th to the 13th, and
Yeah.
I still remember the police monitoring the tunnels and the bridges.
But then you started that very night on the 12th, you actually took a photograph.
Yeah, it's a very shaky image. I can remember how I had trouble operating the camera.
But it's also probably a long exposure, right? Some of those exposures are several hours long. And I imagine in the days following photographing, there was a lot of atmosphere just from the pulverized everything that occurred.
Visual references to the event all the way up to the 14th, 15th. You can see still traces of the event. Yeah.
Right. Have there been times when you've felt sort of burdened by the idea that you have to take one of
Oh,
those shots?
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's been a complete fight between the project and me. How can I structure this in a way? Who is going to win? Is my life going to win? Is the project going to win? And
Right.
more often than not, the project is winning over my life. I mean, I was literally, thinking about that when my mother was dying. It's like, what would I do? I mean, it's like that
Yeah.
kind of scenario, and a very odd situation that a process can be stronger than yourself, or it's taking over. It's quite daunting in some ways. Yeah.
I mean, it's also metaphorically, it's a little bit like registering your existence every day in a particular place. And when the light goes out on the series, that's because the light's gone on you more likely than not, right? Unless you move or something like that.
Yeah, or there's another way of doing it. I mean, I came across, for American Portrait, I went to Dakota, and that Polish sculptor who's in the 70s decided to sculpt Crazy Horse out of a mountain, and he
right.
said, okay, well, I need a dozen children to finish that job, and he had many children and their grandchildren, and they're all dedicated and committed to
Right.
pursuing that work.
Your children are
Gone
not
there.
burdened with carrying on this project, I hope. There's also the burden of the stuff, and I often think about that in terms of photographers' work in general. They accumulate so many negatives, so many prints.
I think it's an extraordinary record in its entirety. I hear your argument that there are these special items, and of course September 11th is in a museum collection, and other dates are, and it's been shown in many museums, and many images are in museum collections. But I do think that what makes it truly extraordinary is that it is so massive, and that it is an ongoing and complex series.
I mean, it's one of those epic projects that can't really be understood in its entirety in one moment or from one point of view. And it's not something meant to be consumed instantly or even analyzed over, the course of a conversation. I was thinking about this massive exhibition you did in Germany at the Kaisersaal, which was everything in the series to date in a building that had been bombed out, like a very special space. I imagine the burden of printing all of that, creating that object, was a burden in one way, but also too, I think the experience of that work of art must have been very sort of absorbing and perhaps confusing to some people, maybe even more like visiting the Vietnam Memorial or something like that.
It was an incredible experience for me to make it and to experience it and see people experience it. I think that was probably the most complete and significant way of showing it. In other venues it was on a much smaller scale. Mm-hmm. And the reactions were remarkable, and the museum has kept an image of it at the entrance of the museum as that this was one of the most remarkable shows of those first 10 years before the space was restored. So there were more things that fell into place that one person can control. I wouldn't want to take credit for that. It was just unbelievable that it would work exactly in that space, exactly in that time, exactly in that size. I mean, that is nothing you can plan in the same way that I couldn't plan to be in that apartment. This is more chance than anything.
Yeah. I was going to say, too, it's a minimalism, in terms of art references. I can see this at Dia Beacon, for example, as, and now that I think about it, it feels very much like a German project in that sense, not to stereotype, but, the Beschers and their sort of methodical approach to documenting industrial architecture and that sort of minimalist in the sense that it's breaking an experience down to just the moment of looking at something and doing that in a systematic way. It mimics the rational systems of the industrial world we live in, but it also is deeply personal from the point of view that it's like human eyesight.
I sort of anthropomorphize Window in a sense that I think of it as a person. I think of it as a portrait, that the city is kind of a person too. And in the same way that you're not the same person in one moment or one day, one day someone will see you rush unfriendly through a door, and the next time you will be sweet and slow and open the door for the next person.
Right.
And it's the same you, but you experienced at a different time in a different way. And that, of course, also changes with age. So it's that tension, I think, is embedded there, and I have really no idea what it is. When I look at it, I want to learn something that I didn't know.
Window by Rainer Leist is currently featured in an exhibition at the Koenig Museum in Landshut, Germany, centered on a sculpture by artist Fritz Koenig titled The Sphere, which was damaged during the September 11th attacks, but survived and has been restored. Leist continues to photograph Lower Manhattan from his 37th Street window. The following conversation with Leo Rubinfein took place in downtown Manhattan on August 18th, 2021.
Leo Rubinfein is a photographer and essayist living in New York. His photographs extend to mid-century street photography by mapping global territories and making use of color. His book, Wounded Cities, a memoir begun after the September 11th attacks, explores the mental wound of that day in writing and in portraits of people taken in cities marked by similar terror.
In the year 2001, my wife and I spent all the money we could lay our hands on to buy an apartment in Lower Manhattan near the Wall Street office where she worked. Over just 2 city blocks, it looked straight into the World Trade Center, whose colossal towers loomed above it, changing languidly each day as the earth rotated from gold to silver to gold. The moving company installed us on September 4th, a week before they were destroyed. And we watched the orange sun drop down the slot between them into New Jersey's faraway hills, the offices going yellow as their lights came on, level upon level upon level.
You're probably one of the few people I know who are actually an eyewitness to World Trade so close up. You dramatize it in the book. You talk about your sort of incoherence at what you were seeing. As anyone watching some traumatic real-life episode, it seems unreal. You associate with movies, time slows down, all these things happen. But here we are 20 years away from that. Do you feel that your memory is accurate? What do you sort of come back to in terms of those moments?
I think my
that
memory's
morning?
not accurate at all, and I think in fact it began to degrade very shortly after the events. One of the things that was very powerful for me right after the event was the memory of the sound of the airplane, the first of the airplanes
Right.
coming toward the Trade Center. And I was actually sitting at my desk working on a piece of writing right here. Heard a very strange and rather frightening sound from outside, and came out onto this terrace where we're sitting, saw the first of the airplanes roaring down the west side and heading for the Trade Center. And I remembered it clearly for about 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and then it went, and I don't remember it anymore. And I think that must be true of almost everything in the book. I mean, you know, ultimately, you begin with something you see, something material that you experience, but you retell it and you retell it and you retell it to yourself, not to mention to other people.
Right.
And as you do, it changes.
And the book took about 7 or 8 years, right? I mean, it also became a kind of personal memoir
of the
your
entire
whole
period,
life.
yes,
Right.
and of trying to make sense of that period and of what we were living through. The moment before that attack, I was very much a sort of post-Cold War optimist in the Clintonian mode, you know, who really thought the horror of the Cold War, with which I'd lived from the moment I was conscious, was now over. And that was, in retrospect, a ridiculously naive.
To go from the feeling of being a sort of post-Cold War optimist to the hard reality of witnessing something so undeniable must have been deeply traumatic.
Well, it was shocking and totally disorienting, and I felt like the world I thought I lived in was not the world that I lived in. I read Susan Sontag's furious piece.
In the New Yorker,
It was in the New Yorker
yeah.
right after it, and I was angry at her. And I'm not a great fan of Susan Sontag, I never have been, but I was angry at her specifically because she essentially said,
was our
Americans,
fault.
you created this. It's
Right.
not entirely your fault, but wake up. What are you thinking, that you had no role in this?
She used the term American triumphalism.
Yes, and I think that, you know, look, I think that people, as I've learned all over the world, blind themselves. They blind themselves everywhere. But this was our particular case of it.
This book is very special in the way it's designed, and it's a product of who you are as both a writer and a photographer, or I should say photographer and writer. I think that's the way you would prefer to have it. I think it comes from kind of Japanese book design in a way where there are foldouts and other kinds of things which I know you admire. Can you talk about the way in which you conceived of combining the two aspects of what you do? One, you have this very powerful story of your personal memoir of this experience with photographs, which is what you do, have done seriously since you started your career really as an artist.
There are two separate ways to talk about that. One, which is simpler, is the matter of design. And that's really very simple. I had gone to see a publisher at a stage when the book was taking shape. The way he put it, I loved. And he said, a book of writing is meant to be read lying on your back, on a couch or on a bed, and propping it up on your chest and
Right.
reading, right? And a book of pictures is meant to be read sitting at a table where the book sits, or holding it on your lap. So your physical relation with the two kinds of book is different. And I thought this was quite a marvelous observation. This was the solution. It was a design solution, but it ended up being a piece of the content of the book.
You're a street photographer. My question would be, like, what can you read in the faces of
Well,
people?
so that's the second part. I've always been both a photographer and a writer since the very beginning. But I was a photographer first, and if I'm at all useful as a writer, I would say that much of what I've learned about writing, I've actually learned from photography. How to find the evocative physical detail, which in writing can become how to find the evocative turn of phrase that somebody else uses, which
Right.
then becomes dialogue in your
Your writing's very descriptive, I would say, and
It's
and
very descriptive, it's very visual, it's very rich, it's very tactile.
Right.
And so all of that comes from the lesson of photography. Now, at the same time, I grew up in a photographic culture, right, which doggedly insisted that everything was about surface. And you would hear this pronounced as a dogma by great figures, by Diane Arbus, Gary Winogrand, Lee Friedlander, their patron, John Charkovsky.
And do you think that's a kind of cynicism, or was it just a
No,
kind
I
of
think that it was
realism?
I think it was neither. I think that there was a certain moment in the cultural life of this country where taking that very self-effacing stand was highly expressive. It had a certain amount of irony to it. The irony itself was highly critical of the world around us. And in fact, one has to work a bit hard looking at the work of the people of that time to reconstruct the world in which they worked and how they spoke to that world. For me, there was always a feeling that that deadpan wasn't going to work for me. I was too young. It was not my world. I didn't share the sense of irony that animated them. There was not a art world context that was going to provide the meanings that the photographs that I was making really had. Our world was going in other directions. It was interested in other things. I came down a peculiar path that I had followed in the course of my life. And so I began to feel at a certain point that I needed to provide the context. Nobody else was going to do it. So the writing that I was going to put into these books was going to, in some way, obliquely say what these photographs were about. It never speaks of them. There's never a moment in this text or any of the others that I've done where I actually talk about my own pictures. I mean, that seems kind of awful to me, unseemly in a way. But what it does
That's the problematic of the artist lecture in some ways,
right?
Yeah.
But what it does do is it sets up a whole world, a universe, which is the universe of thought and feeling, out of which the pictures arise. And then one can look at these pictures and say, oh, I get it.
It seems counterintuitive, but in some ways you're treating photography as abstraction. It needs a context to be able to understand it. And I think that what you're referring to earlier when you're speaking of Arbus, Friedlander, Winogrand is kind of John Charkovsky, curator at MoMA, idea of documentary photography being a projection of something you feel onto something else.
Onto the world.
Admission in some ways that what you're seeing isn't cold hard truth, it's objective fact.
That's right.
It is that too.
It's very much that.
It is that too, but it's also the idea that you're projecting something onto the face of someone else.
That's right.
What you're feeling.
As it says in the book, somewhere in the text, one felt standing on a street corner in New York City in 2002 or 2003 or in London in 2007 or whenever. So all of a sudden they had a role in your existence.
I want to jump to something more contemporary related to this, though. You repeat over and over this line of who are they?
Who are they?
Who were the terrorists? Why did they hate us? Did you bring any insights to the insurrection of January 6th? Watching the images that day, I just think from the point of view of you having looked at people around the world with this kind of
to me, one of the greatest mysteries is, and it was true in the period immediately following September 11th, it was true January 6th this year, is why people in a country that has so much, that offers so much to its people, not to every person, my God, I mean, any number of people in this country are suffering in all sorts of ways, but I'm not sure that those who were suffering are the ones who we saw on January 6th either.
Right.
To me, it's a great mystery why people who live in societies that have so much can be as angry as many people in the United States seem to be. I don't get it.
It's
didn't get it.
almost a reverse impulse in some ways. I think their lives are boring in a way, and they're animated by a sense of call to war.
Or need for drama in any event. I mean, one of the most dangerous things about us is that very few of us have any direct memory of what war is. I had a little tiny bit of an experience of war, which was standing on this terrace, watching that airplane crash into the Trade Center and explode, and knowing that it was full of people and that they had all just been burned alive.
Here's a bigger question. How do kind of global capitalist interests impact the lives of individual people? And I think it brings us back to your book. Like, there are things like an attack on wealth, an attack on freedoms, which was what September 11th represented for a lot of people. But how do individuals experience that personally? That's the hardest thing and maybe the most important to get your mind around.
One feels looking at Afghanistan, one feels looking at global warming, you feel a sensation a little bit like when you're out there swimming in the sea and you've gotten a little bit too far out and the sea is enormous. And if you're strong, if you're lucky, if you're determined, maybe you can swim back to the shore. So I think that people pay all the time for these things. Afghans pay. Americans who sent soldiers pay. What did they believe? What dreams were in their minds that made them go and do the things that caused them to pay? It'll vary from one family to another, one person to another. How can a whole society act more consciously, act more deliberately? I don't know.
Leo Rubinstein's book, Wounded Cities, was published by Steidl in 2008 and is available on Amazon.